Verily, there is nothing so hideous as the monsters, so contrary to nature, known as the Witchers, for they are the offspring of foul sorcery and devilry. They are rogues without virtue, conscience, or scruple, true diabolic creations, fit only for killing. There is no place amidst honest men for such as they. In Kaer Morhen, where these infamous beings nestle, where they perform their foul practices, must be wiped from the surface of this earth, and all trace of it strewn with salt and saltpeter. Witchers, a universal weapon against the bloodthirsty monsters of the continent. They are the main trademark of this world. Not sorcerers with their arrogance and pride. Not knights with their thirst for meaningless battles and power plays. Not even kings or emperors who can send thousands of common soldiers to their deaths with a single word. It is the Witchers who embody the world of the Witcher, unpretentious and simple, hard and unfriendly, purposeful and loyal only to their craft. They knew no childhood. They were taken from their parents or found in the streets. They were subjected to horrible trials, inhuman tortures and mutations from which only 3 out of 10 survived. They were trained in the harshest ways. Their bodies were altered. They were taught to be ruthless. They were forged like swords in this crucible to become the weapons of all humanity. A weapon against the most powerful and inescapable evil imaginable. A weapon against unimaginable monsters, such as mighty demons of the underworld, colossal dragons, ancient giants, immortal vampires, cursed spirits, and against all that can threaten man. The sacrifice of the Witchers, their dedication to their craft, made the continent suitable for humans for the rapid development and growth of an entire race. But in return for this gift to humanity, as is often the case, they received only scorn and contempt, anger and hatred. For this is the world of the Witcher, a world of absolute injustice, a world of cruelty and ruthlessness, a world so much like the real world. In today's installment of The Witcher's World, we finally reach a key moment in this universe. The moment of creating the ultimate weapon against monsters, Witchers, in the flesh. We have already told you guys about the creation of the Witchers in a separate video from a certain series of videos. Be sure to click the link and watch it. But finally, our video series on the history of the Witcher world has also reached this point in the continent's timeline. So let us dive into the story once again. This is the Old Witcher. Before we begin, we would like to thank our patrons for their support, without which this channel would not be able to develop at all. If you want to join the ranks of these great people, you can find our Patreon and YouTube subscription links in the video description. Do support us and we will thank you with quality content. Anyway, get ready because today we're going to talk about the history of the Witcher world and tell you about the creation of the Order of the Witchers. Witchercraft preconditions. First, let us talk briefly about the state of affairs in the world of the Witcher, the conditions in which the confrontation with monsters finally came to the forefront of human society. Let us start with a brief description of the situation in the world that we described in detail in the last video of our series. And so we are at the end of the 9th, beginning of the 10th century according to the Elven chronology. The years 870 and 940. On the political map of the continent, we finally have almost all known human states. From Temeria to Redania, from Central to Aedirn, and even further, the human dominions stretch far from the elves. The humans drove the elves from most of their cities and settlements and began to settle in the vast areas they had conquered. They began to multiply in number, building more and more cities and villages. A peace, though not a very strong one, was established between the new races. Of course, all the players on the political map had their own territorial claims. For example, Sintra claimed Aedirn, calling the young state a fragment of the kingdom of Sintra. And the results of the 6 Years' War, which we also talked about in the last video, did not please many people. But in general, no one wanted to attack anyone. The war with the elves did not go unnoticed, and the states had to regain and strengthen their power in the already occupied territories. At the same time, the sorcerers were doing quite well. Bernard and Aretuza began their work, giving the world new young spellcasters. The chapter created its own policy, going after all those who did not agree with the new rules of the magical society, and the renegade sorcerers went deep underground. So the Brotherhood of Sorcerers had a lot to do, and somehow everyone forgot or was unable to take care of ordinary people. Of course, as always. If at the beginning of the colonization of the continent the first sorcerers defended the first human settlements, now there were too many territories to protect, and the sorcerers were too busy restoring order among themselves. The armies of the kings stretched across new borders, and there was simply no one left to fight the main threat. The utterly diverse ranks of monsters that began to kill humans in ever-increasing numbers. Everyone survived as best as they could. Some worshipped the powerful monsters as if they were gods. Others built their own defenses and created forces to defend the settlements. Wandering sorcerers and knights also helped, sacrificing their lives to protect those who had it harder than the others. Still, the continent needed a complete, comprehensive solution, and it was only a matter of time before it arrived. Alzur. It all began with a name, the name of an unwanted child who did not know his parents, a name that would later go down in the history of the continent, the name of Alzur. As a baby, Alzur was thrown in the front of the door of a wealthy mansion in Maribor. In the child's diaper was only a note that read, "His mother is dead, and his father is one of you." So the men shunned the baby, lest rumors spread of their possible infidelity to their wives. But the women of the family estate were more kind-hearted. They protected the child and gave the little boy the name Alzur. Due to the circumstances of his birth, Alzur spent his entire childhood in the company of women rather than men. He grew up to be a very noble young man. He read many books, especially books about knights. It was these books that shaped Alzur's view of the world. They made the boy believe that the world should be filled with knights and free of horror and evil at all costs. Thus, at a young age, Alzur traveled to the towns around Maribor and tried to help anyone in need. Once he got into a fight with bandits and was beaten almost to death. Another time, he miraculously survived another fight with bandits. And a third time, he disappeared, only to be found alone in an abandoned alley. In front of him lay 3 charred corpses. Alzur had killed the bandits with fire from his own hands. It turned out that this boy had a powerful magical talent and was a true source. Very soon, when the famous sorcerer Cosimo Malaspina visited Maribor, Alzur was put under his care. The people of the estate were afraid of Alzur's sudden gift. But Malaspina was amazed by the power that flowed through the young magician's veins. So Alzur became a student of Cosimo Malaspina. He soon learned that this famous sorcerer was not at all simple and tried to create truly incredible things. Alzur was fascinated by Cosimo's ideas and became his most loyal collaborator. What exactly were those ideas? They fit perfectly with Alzur's idea that the world should be filled with powerful knights and free of evil. That is because Cosimo Malaspina was working on creating a superhuman, a creature without emotions or cruelty. A powerful and pure being, a perfect being who would bring order to this world. The student and the teacher began to work together on this project, day and night, and they did make progress. In fact, the experiments to create superhumans were more genetic than magical in nature. The sorcerers worked with mutagens, serums, and elixirs, and magic was only one of many tools that could help achieve the desired result. For this reason, young Alzur's ideas were very fresh and useful to Cosimo Malaspina. The old sorcerer was also pleased that Alzur was willing to do anything and reject any moral standards to achieve the desired result. Initially, the project to create a superhuman was financed by the chief spellcaster of Risberg Castle, the legendary Ortolan. This fella, a bit crazy about genetics, conducted many similar experiments himself, all in secret from the chapter, which did not approve of such actions. Therefore, Cosimo Malaspina and Alzur were sent away from Pry Nice to an old castle abandoned by the elves, which humans later named Kaer Morhen. In the northern part of the continent, in lands not yet too populated, the experimenters were free to do as they pleased. Exactly what they did there is not known, but the results of their activities made it possible to draw clear conclusions. Malaspina and Alzur conducted cruel experiments on humans. After they left the walls of Kaer Morhen, the castle became known as a cursed place. Its cellars and cells were filled with the spirits of people who had died horrible deaths. Those cellars, they say, were a terrible graveyard of corpses. Corpses with altered limbs, with bone growths on their bodies, with grimaces of pain and suffering on their disfigured faces. Malaspina and Alzur probably gathered people in the neighborhood who had nothing to lose, paid them money, looked for the disabled, bribed the guards to hand over the prisoners. In any case, they did find their methods. Thus did the two sorcerers carry out their experiments on these disadvantaged people, who became mere guinea pigs. They studied how their bodies were affected by this or that mutagen, which combinations of mutagens were relatively safe, What criteria should a subject meet to be susceptible to mutations? Eventually, the researchers got answers to most of their questions. By the time they left Kaer Morhen and returned to Rysburg to report to Ortolan, they already had the work and operating rules in place to begin the main experiments. Ortolan was satisfied. The project was entering its final state, in its final phase. And the first of the developments was that the subjects would be children. It is true, it was the child's body that proved most susceptible to change, mutation, and adaptation. As you can see, the principles of the legendary magicians were such that they were very calm about experiments on children, so you guys can draw your own conclusions about them. Very soon, children were gathered from all the villages and towns around Rysburg. Some were found on the streets, others were picked up and kidnapped, lured with candy or toys. The city guards were only too happy to reduce the number of orphans on the streets who were always trying to steal from someone. For the children, Cosimo was like a kind, gray-haired Gramps from fairy tales who gives presents. Too bad they did not know how cruel fairy tales can be when they become reality. Alzur was involved in similar activities. He bought children from dysfunctional families who were happy to have fewer mouths to feed. One such boy, for example, was named Erland of Larvik, and his mother sold him to Alzur for not too many coins. But she would probably have given him up for a half a pint of beer and a cheap dagger. There were many such stories, but it is the story of Erland of Larvik that we know best, and from his testimony can we draw a complete picture of the process of creating witchers. Erland of Larvik. In total, Alzur collected 38 children while traveling around the Rysburg neighborhood. This was the first batch, and among them was our Erland from Larvik. The boy did not expect anything good from the future, but the reality exceeded all his worst expectations. From the very first day, the children were subjected to rigorous physical training. They were severely punished for disobedience, and if they tried to escape, their lives were made a living hell. The children had to be as physically fit as possible. Their bodies had to be able to withstand anything. While the children were being trained by specially invited masters of swordsmanship, military affairs, and other crafts, the sorcerers prepared everything for experiments with mutations, gradually introducing strange mushrooms into the children's diet. These mushrooms made their hands tremble and their heads spin. The children, of course, remained children. They played and discussed how they would defeat Alzur one day. In the afternoon, they would run away to the castle walls to sit there in peace and look at the stars. Erland, for example, fell in love with a girl named Jagada. They often sat together on the castle walls at night. But even these moments of relief and respite soon vanished. Decoctions of strange mushrooms began to bear fruit. The children grew incredibly fast, quickly gaining strength and muscle. However, this was only true for the boys. The girls were much less susceptible to such substances. They began to get sick and weak. And very soon, in addition to the training, the processes of mutation began on the children. Every day a child was taken to the office of Cosimo Malaspina and Alzur. They literally took them away forever because they usually only brought out the corpses of dead children. For all the time the children were in the castle, their cries and groans could be heard, but they gradually faded away. Nothing was explained to the other children. They were only forced to bury the bodies of their new friends in the graves. One day, Jagada became another victim. Jagada was gone within the first week, cold and buried with the other failed prospects. I did my best to bury her mangled body in the makeshift graveyard the other prospects and I had built. I didn't speak for days after that, but I ran faster and I struck harder. Every inch of me was on fire, and I had nowhere to go but forward. Young Erland of Larvik was incredibly angry. His shock burned out everything in him except hate. Unable to take revenge, he promised that one day the sorcerers would pay for what they had done to Jagada. The first witchers. Meanwhile, the experiments continued, and one day they finally produced a result. Instead of another dead body, Malaspina and Alzur finally brought a living boy out of the office. Yes, he was kind of in a dream, but he was breathing, and very soon he opened his eyes. Eyes with capped pupils. The eyes of the first witcher in history. The boy changed greatly after the experiments. He became distant and silent. He must have experienced a real shock that cannot be expressed in words. However, his physical abilities became incredible. He became faster and stronger than all the other children, and in training he outperformed even his trainers. His cat eyes could see in the dark. His wounds healed quickly. No toxic substances given to all the children could harm him anymore. As time passed, these cases became more and more frequent. There were also many corpses though. All the girls died. They turned out to be an unsuitable resource for sorcerers, just like most boys. And only about 3 or 4 out of 10 survived the trial of the grasses. That was the name given to the process of introducing mutagens into the bodies of children. One day it was Erland's turn. Yes, the boy was lucky to survive. His hatred for the sorcerers probably kept him from dying during the inhuman experiments. I was mutated less than a week later, and I think it was only my hatred for the sorcerers that kept me alive. More than 2 centuries later, I still have never felt pain like I did on that operating table. After the experiments, only a small fraction of the original number of children remained, the first generation of witchers on the continent. Although no one called them witchers at the time, they were just guinea pigs, nothing more. Now they were taught not only the elements for the development of physical strength, but also magic, alchemy, craftsmanship, blacksmithing, everything that a superhuman could theoretically need for his activity. And the children learned everything, were very receptive to everything, except for one craft. The children did not perceive magic at all, could not control it, and could only use the simplest gestural spells, the so-called magical signs. Almost circus tricks when compared to true power. It was a failure, not for Kaer or Alzur, but for Ortolan, who did all the funding, because Ortolan wanted to create powerful magicians. Ortolan wanted to have a formula to create the ideal sorcerer who didn't need natural talent to be powerful, who doesn't have to be the source of magical energy, that is. It was all in vain, all the resources, all the connections, all the time. In the eyes of Ortolan, it all led to nothing. So the project was curtailed, and Kaer Morhen fell out of favor with his patron. Besides, without Ortolan's patronage, the chapter might have sniffed something out. There was only one way out. Very quickly, Alzur and Malaspina finished their work and left Risberg Castle with the young mutants. They headed east to the abandoned fortress of Morgrade and settled there. They plotted how to turn their defeat into a victory. They saw how serious the monster problem was on the continent, and Alzur could finally put his idea into action. He could finally create real knights to save the world from darkness. He had children ready, physically incredibly powerful and resistant to any harm. Children who could grow into something much greater. The so-called Order of the Defenders from Darkness. The Order of the Witchers. Kaer Morhen and Alzur continued their work with a completely new concept of the result they saw. They were ready to change the world. But this is another story for another video. And now we would like to thank everyone who watched this video to the end. Please like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. In return, we will give you guys regular quality content. Let us know what you think about the characters of Kaer Morhen and Alzur, if they are a good quote-unquote match or not, work ethic-wise that is. And do write if the author made a mistake somewhere or forgot something. It will be quite interesting to read that. That is all for now. We look forward to seeing you again when the old Witcher speaks once more.